When you talk about the biggest trains that ever rolled across American rails, you're talking about machines that redefined what steam power could accomplish. These weren't just locomotives, they were moving mountains of steel that hauled the freight, coal, and raw materials that built modern America. From the Sierra Nevada to the Alleghenies, these giants conquered grades that would break lesser machines, and their legacy still echoes through every diesel running today. 10. Texas Pacific Railroad I-1 Class 2-10-4. The Texas Pacific Railroad changed everything in 1925 when they took delivery of the first true 2-10-4 locomotives from Lima Locomotive Works. These 10 machines, numbered 600 through 609, became the namesake for the entire Texas wheel arrangement. Lima had taken their successful Berkshire design and stretched it with an additional driving axle, creating something entirely new. These beasts packed 29-inch by 32-inch cylinders and ran on 63-inch drivers, producing 83,000 pounds of tractive effort that could climb to 96,000 pounds when their Franklin Railway Supply booster kicked in. The T&P was so impressed with these superpower locomotives that they ordered batch after batch, eventually owning 70 of them by 1929, the largest fleet of 2-10-4s in America until World War II. The catch was those smaller drivers created counterbalancing problems. At 45 miles per hour, the driving wheels would actually lift off the rails, forcing speed restrictions that limited their potential. Still, for hauling heavy freight across Texas at moderate speeds, nothing matched their pulling power. Lima's designer William Woodard had proven his superpower concept worked, combining high boiler pressure with a massive firebox supported by that four-wheel trailing truck. These locomotives laid the groundwork for every superpower steamer that followed. But Lima wasn't finished perfecting the design. They were about to solve that troublesome speed restriction with bigger wheels. 9. Chesapeake Ohio Railway T1 Class 2-10-4. In 1930, Lima Locomotive Works solved the speed problem that plagued earlier 2-10-4s when they built 40 Texas types for the Chesapeake Ohio Railway. These T1 class machines, numbered 3000 through 3039, rode on 69-inch diameter driving wheels instead of the smaller 63-inch wheels used on earlier designs. That extra 6 inches made all the difference. The larger wheels provided enough space to properly counterweight the massive rods and valve gear, eliminating the speed restrictions that hampered the Texas Pacific engines. The C&O put these locomotives to work, hauling 10,000-ton coal trains across the flatlands of Ohio, running from Russell, Kentucky to Columbus. They replaced the older 2-8-8-2 compound mallets that had been plodding along at slow speeds, and suddenly coal trains were moving at respectable speeds while pulling unprecedented tonnage. Each T1 weighed over 500,000 pounds and could develop tremendous power at speed, exactly what William Woodard's superpower philosophy promised. These weren't just powerful, they were fast and powerful, a combination that changed freight railroading forever. The C&O's success with these locomotives caught the attention of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which desperately needed new freight power during World War II. When wartime restrictions prevented the Pennsy from designing its own locomotives, they turned to the proven C&O design and built 125 copies in their own Altoona shops between 1942 and 1944. Those Pennsy J1 class locomotives became the largest 2-10-4s ever built, cementing the C&O T1's legacy as the definitive Texas-type design. While Lima perfected conventional designs, Baldwin was about to deliver articulated power to a railroad that desperately wanted something else entirely. Before we move on to the next one in the list, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you're enjoying this content so far, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. Thanks to all of you who do. 8. Baltimore Ohio Railroad EM1 Class 2-8-8-4. The Baltimore Ohio Railroad didn't want steam locomotives in 1944. They wanted diesels. But with World War II raging and the War Production Board controlling all locomotive production, the B&O faced a simple choice: take 32-8-8-4 Yellowstone types from Baldwin Locomotive Works or get nothing at all. So the EM1 class was born, numbered 7,600 through 7,629, and later renumbered 650 through 679. These were the smallest Yellowstones built for any American railroad, but also the most modern and most numerous of the type. Each EM1 stretched nearly 122 feet long and weighed 627,000 pounds without its tender. Four 24-inch by 32-inch cylinders drove 64-inch wheels with 235 pounds per square inch of boiler pressure, generating 115,000 pounds of tractive effort. The B&O put them to work on the Cumberland Division, one of the toughest stretches of railroad in the East, where they hauled heavy coal trains through the Allegheny Mountains. Later, they shifted to the Pittsburgh Division, handling lake mineral traffic between Wheeling and Pittsburgh. Despite the B&O's initial reluctance, the EM1s proved themselves as reliable, powerful machines that could even handle the occasional passenger train. That relatively low boiler pressure actually helped them maintain traction without slipping on steep grades. Some of the heaviest trains needed two EM1s on the point and a third pushing from the rear. But the railroad had been right about wanting diesels. By 1957, the first retirements began, and all 30 were scrapped by 1960 after careers spanning just 15 years. None survived for preservation. While Baltimore, Ohio stuck with proven articulated designs, Pennsylvania Railroad was about to gamble everything on an experimental passenger locomotive concept. 7. Pennsylvania Railroad Class T1 4-4-4-4 Duplex. Raymond Loewy's streamlined shark nose became one of the most recognizable shapes in American railroading when the Pennsylvania Railroad introduced their Class T1 duplex locomotives in 1942. Baldwin Locomotive Works built two prototypes numbered 6,110 and 6,111, followed by 50 production units split between Baldwin and the Penske's own Altoona Works from 1945 to 1946. These weren't articulated locomotives. The duplex design used two sets of driving wheels on a single rigid frame, driven by four smaller cylinders instead of two large ones. The concept reduced hammer blow on the track and allowed lighter reciprocating parts that could reach incredible speeds. Each T1 weighed just over 500,000 pounds and was designed to haul 880 tons at 100 miles per hour between Harrisburg and Chicago. They used Franklin Type A oscillating cam poppet valves, cutting-edge technology that promised better steam distribution and higher efficiency. The T1s were technological marvels, but they were also temperamental beasts. They suffered from chronic wheel slip both when starting and at speed, especially on the production units. The complex poppet valves were difficult to maintain and prone to fatigue failures at sustained high speeds. An experienced engineer who understood the T1's quirks could coax impressive performance from them. There are credible accounts of speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. But most engineers struggled with the slippery machines, and maintenance costs ran high. The Pennsylvania Railroad began replacing them with diesels in 1948, just 3 years after the production units arrived. By 1956, all 52 T1s had been scrapped, their potential forever a matter of debate among rail fans who still argue whether better training and maintenance could have made them successful. But while Pennsylvania struggled with experimental passenger power, Union Pacific had already perfected reliable articulated freight haulers that conquered mountains without drama. 6. Union Pacific Railroad Challenger, number 39854-6-6-4. American Locomotive Company delivered Union Pacific Challenger 3985 in July 1943 as part of a wartime order for powerful fast freight locomotives. She was one of 105 Challengers that Union Pacific would eventually roster, making it the largest fleet of this wheel arrangement in North America. The 4-6-6-4, designed 4 leading wheels, 2 sets of 6 drivers, and 4 trailing wheels, was essentially 2 engines under 1 boiler, with an articulated frame that could negotiate curves despite measuring nearly 122 feet long. This particular locomotive came from the final heavy Challenger order, designated Class 46644, and incorporated design improvements learned from building the massive big boy 4-8-8-4s a few years earlier. Number 3985 weighed 317 tons in working order, with another 174 tons for the tender when two-thirds full. 4 cylinders measuring 21 inches by 32 inches drove 69-inch wheels, producing 97,350 pounds of tractive effort at 280 pounds per square inch boiler pressure. She could sustain speeds above 50 miles per hour pulling expedited freight and topped out around 70 miles per hour. The Challengers were designed to handle freight over Wyoming's grades between Ogden and Green River, where the steeper climbs went to the big boys while the Challengers maintained speed on more moderate terrain. Number 3985 ran in revenue service until 1957, then sat stored at Cheyenne until 1981 when Union Pacific employees restored her to operation. She became the world's largest operating steam locomotive, pulling excursions across the UP system until mechanical problems sidelined her in 2010. When Big Boy 4014 returned to service in 2019, that title passed to the larger locomotive, and 3985 was officially retired in 2020. The Challenger proved articulated freight power could be fast and reliable, but Pennsylvania Railroad had one more duplex experiment to run. 5. Pennsylvania Railroad Class Q2 4-4-6-4 duplex. The Pennsylvania Railroad's Class Q2 represented the absolute peak of duplex steam locomotive development when prototype number 6131 rolled out of Altoona Works in 1944. 25 production units followed in 1945 and 1946, numbered 6,175 through 6,199. These were freight locomotives with an unusual 4-4-6-4 wheel arrangement, 4 leading wheels, 2 groups of drivers with 4 wheels in front and 6 in back, and a 4-wheel trailing truck supporting the massive firebox. Raymond Loewy designed their streamlined casing, giving them a sleek air-smooth profile that hid the complexity beneath. Static testing on the Pennsylvania Railroad's test plant proved these were the most powerful steam locomotives ever built, producing 7,987 indicated horsepower. That's more power than any other reciprocating steam locomotive in history. They weighed 619,100 pounds without the tender and stretched 124 feet 7 inches overall. The Q2s used different cylinder sizes, front and rear. The forward pair measured 19 3/4 inches in diameter with a 28-inch stroke, while the rear cylinders were 23 3/4 inches in diameter with a 29-inch stroke. This unusual arrangement, virtually unique except for compound locomotives, helped distribute power evenly across both driving groups. A trailing truck booster added another 15,000 pounds of tractive effort when needed. The Pennsylvania Railroad claimed these monsters could pull 125 freight cars at 50 miles per hour, hauling tonnage that would require double heading with conventional power. They worked the heavy grades west of Pittsburgh, including Horseshoe Curve and their birthplace at Altoona. But like the T1 passenger duplexes, they arrived too late and cost too much to maintain in the diesel era. The last Q2 was scrapped in 1956, and tragically, none were preserved. While Pennsylvania chased raw horsepower with experimental designs, Norfolk Western was quietly perfecting the compound mallet into the most refined steam locomotive ever built. 4. Norfolk Western Railway Class Y6B2-8-8-2. The Norfolk Western Railway spent 33 years refining the compound mallet 2-8-8-2 design, and the Y6B class represented the absolute pinnacle of that development when construction ended in 1952. These locomotives, numbered 2,171 through 2,200, were the last refinement of a design that traced back through the Y6A and Y6 classes to the earlier Y5s and beyond. The N and W built all of them in their own Roanoke shops, incorporating roller bearings on every axle and automatic lubricators that made maintenance nearly as simple as a diesel. Each Y6B weighed less than either the big boys or the Alleghenies, but could produce 5,500 indicated horsepower at 25 miles per hour while burning coal in compound expansion mode. The compound system used high-pressure steam in the front cylinders, then exhausted it into larger low-pressure cylinders on the rear engine, extracting maximum work from every pound of steam. When needed, engineers could divert live high-pressure steam to the rear cylinders for simple expansion, boosting power for starting heavy trains. The boiler stretched longer than earlier classes, with an enlarged combustion chamber increasing from 42 inches to 84 inches. This pushed the smokebox forward, requiring mounting the Worthington feedwater heater on top. These locomotives could pull 14,500-ton coal trains unassisted from Crewe to Lambert's Point near Norfolk. They worked everywhere across the N and W system, hauling drag-speed coal trains out of the Blue Ridge Mountains, pulling merchandise freights, switching in yards, and pushing helper service on steep grades. Locomotive 2200, completed in May 1952, holds the distinction of being the very last mainline steam locomotive built in the United States. The N and W kept them running until 1960, making them among the final steam locomotives operating in regular service anywhere in America. But conventional design wasn't the only way to build powerful locomotives. Southern Pacific had been running their boilers backwards for decades. 3. Southern Pacific Railroad AC-12 Class 4-8-8-2 cab forward. Southern Pacific's AC-12 class represented the ultimate development of the most unusual steam locomotives ever built in quantity, the cab-forward articulated. Baldwin Locomotive Works delivered 20 of these machines between October 1943 and March 1944, numbered 4,275 through 4,294. The design was essentially a conventional 2-8-8-4 Yellowstone running backwards, with the cab mounted at the front where the smokebox would normally sit. This put the engineer and fireman ahead of the boiler, breathing clean air instead of choking on smoke and fumes in the long tunnels and snow sheds of Donner Pass and the Sierra Nevada. Oil firing made the arrangement possible fuel piped from the tender to the firebox without needing a coal bunker up front. Southern Pacific had been perfecting this concept since 1910, and the AC-12s were the culmination of that development. The complete locomotive and tender weighed 1,046,900 pounds and could develop 6,000 horsepower while generating 124,300 pounds of tractive effort from 4 24-inch by 32-inch cylinders. They measured 125 feet 6 inches overall and rode on 63-inch drivers suited for mountain grades. The distinctive streamlined front end featured a white band, an air horn mounted prominently, and a streamlined pilot. These were powerful, reliable machines that worked across the SP system, though they became famous for battling the grades of Donner Pass and Cascade Summit. Southern Pacific built these during World War II when demand for freight capacity hit its peak, and they proved their worth hauling everything from troop trains to wartime supplies. When SP began retiring them in the mid-1950s, only number 4294 survived the scrapper's torch. Today, it's preserved at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, the sole remaining example of the cab-forward concept. Unique arrangements were impressive, but Lima Locomotive Works had already built something that defined ultimate steam power through sheer brute force alone. 2. Chesapeake, Ohio, Railway Class H8 Allegheny 2-6-6-6. Lima Locomotive Works built 60 Chesapeake, Ohio, Class H8 locomotives between 1941 and 1948, creating what many consider the most powerful reciprocating steam locomotives ever constructed. The 2-6-6-6 wheel arrangement was unique to this class and the 8 similar locomotives built for the Virginian Railway. Each Allegheny named for the mountain range they conquered weighed 386 tons for the locomotive alone, with another 215 tons for the fully loaded tender. That enormous 3-axle trailing truck carried over 190,000 pounds, supporting a firebox larger than even the big boys at 235 inches by 96 inches. Dynamometer car tests documented by C&O recorded sustained outputs between 6,700 and 6,900 horsepower at about 45 miles per hour, with peak readings hitting 7,498 horsepower. No other steam locomotive ever recorded higher dynamometer horsepower in actual testing. The first driving axle carried 86,700 pounds, the highest axle load of any steam locomotive in history. These machines were designed to haul 11,500-ton coal trains over the 0.57% eastbound grade from White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, to Allegheny, Virginia. Typically, they'd run with one H8 on the point and another pushing from the rear, both running wide open from White Sulphur Springs to the summit. The locomotives could also handle 13,500-ton trains alone on flatter terrain, hauling coal from West Virginia to Columbus, Ohio. During World War II, they pulled troop trains and urgent cargo alongside their regular coal duties, but there was controversy about their actual weight. Lima initially underreported it, and subsequent measurements found them heavier than claimed. The railroad and the crews had heated disputes over this, as wages were calculated based on locomotive weight. By 1956, all 60 had been retired for diesels, with only 2 preserved number 1601 at the Henry Ford Museum and number 1604 at the B&O Railroad Museum. The Allegheny defined power, but there was one locomotive that topped them all, the largest steam locomotive ever built anywhere on Earth. 1. Union Pacific Railroad, Big Boy. Number 4, 0144-8-8-4. The American Locomotive Company delivered Big Boy number 4014 to Union Pacific in December 1941 at a cost of $265,174. She was one of 25 4-8-8-4 articulated locomotives built specifically to conquer the 1.14% eastbound grade of Utah's Wasatch Range between Ogden and Green River. Union Pacific Chief Mechanical Engineer Otto Jabelman led the design team that adapted the successful Challenger 4-6-6-4 design, adding 4 more driving wheels and enlarging the firebox to about 235 inches by 96 inches. The result measured 132 feet, 9 7/8 inches long, and weighed approximately 1.2 million pounds, including the tender. This is the largest steam locomotive ever built. 4 23.75-inch by 32-inch cylinders drove 68-inch wheels at 300 pounds per square inch boiler pressure, producing 135,375 pounds of starting tractive effort. During test runs in 1943, number 4014 generated a maximum of 5,530 horsepower while pulling 65 freight cars between Ogden and Evanston. Big Boys routinely hauled trains of 3,600 tons, but regularly pulled up to 4,200 tons on the Wasatch grades. The locomotives were articulated like a mallet, but used simple expansion in all 4 cylinders, designed for stability at 80 miles per hour, though they rarely ran that fast in freight service. Number 4014's last major overhaul came in 1956, and she ran her final revenue trip on July 21, 1959. Just hours before the last run by any big boy. She traveled 1,031,205 miles before retirement in December 1961. Union Pacific donated her to the Rail Giants Museum in Pomona, California, where she sat until 2013 when UP reacquired her for restoration. After 6 years of work at the Cheyenne shops, Big Boy 4014 steamed again in May 2019. Becoming the world's largest operating steam locomotive and reclaiming that title from Challenger 3985. If you enjoyed learning about these iron giants, watch our video on 10 biggest American tractors you may never heard of. You won't believe your eyes. These 10 locomotives represent the absolute peak of American steam power, the biggest, most powerful machines that ever turned a wheel on this continent. They hauled the coal that powered our cities, the freight that built our industries, and the raw materials that won a world war. Each one pushed the boundaries of what engineers thought possible, combining raw power with the kind of reliability that kept trains moving day and night. Sure, diesels eventually replaced them all, but there's never been anything quite like the sight of a big boy roaring through Sherman Hill or an Allegheny blasting through the mountains with a mile of coal cars behind it.